Why didn't Yasser Arafat make the full transition to peacemaker and governing?
I can't answer that question.
But what do you think, Senator Mitchell?
Yeah. I describe in the book an occasion on which, one of several occasions on which I met with and spoke with him in Gaza, and I encouraged him to enter into negotiations. And I made basically the spiel I made here to him. I made that many times later to President Abbas. He didn't really answer. He just said, yes, we want a peace agreement. He said, but it has to be an agreement that the Palestinian people can accept. Well, of course, an agreement wouldn't be an agreement unless they accepted it. So it was really kind of a non-answer, an inconclusive response. I met him many times. I can't say that I'm able to answer a question about what he was or was not thinking. I think it's a tragedy of historic proportions that the two sides have not reached the point where they recognize that their self-interest lies in reaching an agreement, that they will be better off even though they have to make concessions and even though there are risks. Look, I said often to Prime Minister Netanyahu, you're in a position of strength. You're dominant. You've got the United States backing. Make an agreement, even if it requires some concessions. I'll get to that in a moment. His fear was that a Palestinian state might fail, as many of the other Arab states have failed in the process of the so-called Arab Spring. And in that case, Hamas would take over, and Israel would be faced with a threat right in the heart of Israel. And my answer to him was, the chances of Hamas taking over the West Bank are much greater in the absence of an agreement, because Abbas is losing the support of his own people. He's been saying for 25 years, no violence, peaceful negotiation, recognize Israel. That's the way to get a Palestinian state. And he's got nothing. And so that approach is being discredited, and many Palestinians, as we say in the book, think of him as the enforcer of the Israeli occupation, because his security forces, trained by the United States, do a tremendous job, praised by the Israeli military and other officials for the internal security that they are providing within the West Bank. If that goes, if they fail, and I think they're much more likely to fail in the absence of an agreement than to get an agreement, I think it would be costly for Israel. But, let me make one other comment because I think it's relevant here. Reaching these agreements is very difficult for these political leaders. There is huge personal risk to their lives. There is political risk, risk to their families. It's not easy to do this in these circumstances in which violence has been widespread. There's a long history. So a leader, to get into a negotiation that requires the making of some concessions, is likely to do so only if he or she believes that there is some reasonable prospect of success. And now I'm giving a completely personal opinion, my own speculation, based on many, many hours with both men. I believe that Netanyahu does not believe that President Abbas has the political or personal strength to enter into an agreement and to see it implemented. And therefore, he thinks the process can't succeed because Abbas can't make it succeed. Why then should he endure the wrath of the right wing in his society, which is his party, his government? On the other side, Abbas believes that Netanyahu is not serious, that he doesn't really want an agreement. He cites the fact that Netanyahu campaigned against a two-state agreement. Then was for it, then was against it, now is for it, but says the time isn't right. And therefore, he believes that the process won't succeed. And why should he take the risks on his side of making what are necessary concessions. I think what you need are leaders who have some degree of confidence that this process can work and the courage to endure the enormous risks that they will encounter in going through the process to the end.
On a personal level, behind closed doors, what was Yasser Arafat like? And take me into the room of when you're sitting at the table with both parties. What is happening? What goes on? How does the meeting start off? What goes on?
Yeah. Well, I've met several meetings with Arafat. He always wore this kind of slightly scruffy military uniform. He always had a stubble of beard. His English was not good, but he insisted on using English. He had an interpreter, but he very rarely referred to the interpreter. And it was clear that he was a person in total control. One small example, whenever we finished, there was always a battery of television cameras outside, and he always insisted on going out and making the statements himself in English to the BBC and US channels, even though his English was very poor, and he had a battery of terrific English-speaking young aides, lawyers, political consultants, and so forth, each of whom would have, I thought, made a much more effective presentation, but he wouldn't let them near the cameras. He was a man in total control, and he wanted to be in total control. Personally, our meetings were cordial. We disagreed often, but never in an angry or table-thumping or insulting way. And they, as I describe in the book, the meetings ended almost always inconclusively, as the occasion in which I described. The only meetings between the two sides at the top level that I participated in were when we finally were able to get Abbas and Netanyahu together in September 2010. There were only 4 people in the room, the 2 of them, myself, and Secretary of State Clinton. Abbas and Netanyahu have known each other for a very long time. That's part of the problem. They obviously don't like each other, and they don't trust each other. We had hoped that getting into discussions would create a traction for their continuation and for moving positively toward an agreement. In fact, it was evident, and we sat this close. There were 4 armchairs in a space no bigger than this whole stage. It tended to validate the doubts of each of them about the other. And you could just see viscerally that the reactions weren't good. And so the 4 meetings did not produce any significant progress. And then the process came to an end because at our request, Israel had agreed to a 10-month moratorium on new housing construction starts in the West Bank, excluding East Jerusalem from the agreement. When Abbas did make it clear before entering into talks that he would stay in only if the moratorium were extended. And Prime Minister Netanyahu declined to extend the moratorium. So after just 4 meetings, the process ended.